Aliens sent an SOS. The Deathworlders answered. The wrench slipped and cracked Dara on the knuckle. She hissed, shook her hand once, and went right back to tightening the coolant coupling. The quarry Dawn groaned around her the way old ships do, not from damage, just from age and the cold pressure of deep space. She was wedged inside a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for her shoulders, her boots propped against a support strut, her headlamp throwing a pale circle of light on pipes that had needed attention for 3 weeks. She heard Rolf's boots on the deck above her. Heavy, steady. He was making his second round of the ship, which meant it had been 4 hours since she climbed in here. "Still alive," he called down. "Irritatingly," she said. The coupling sealed. She let out a slow breath and started backing out of the shaft. The Quarry Dawn was not a beautiful ship. It was a working ship, squat, reinforced, built to take rock impacts and hard pressure changes and the kind of rough handling that came with pulling ore out of asteroid belts. It smelled like metal and recycled air, and the synthetic coffee Gus brewed every 6 hours without fail. It was, in every way that mattered, home. She dropped out of the shaft and landed on the deck. Rolf was standing at the corridor junction, holding a mug out to her. She took it. It was warm. "Priya wants you on the bridge," he said. "What for?" "Signal." She looked at him over the rim of the mug. He had his neutral face on, the one that did not tell her anything except that it was worth going to see for herself. The bridge of the Quarry Dawn was not large. 4 seats, 2 active screens, a navigation console that Gus had repaired so many times it had more replacement parts than original ones. Priya was leaning over the communications board with her hair loose and her sleeves pushed up, which meant she had been at it for a while. Gus sat in the far corner eating a nutrient bar and staring at the secondary screen with the mild expression of a man watching weather that did not concern him yet. "Talk to me," Dara said. Priya pointed at the screen. A signal, weak, fragmented, cycling in a pattern that was not random, not human either. The frequency band was registered to non-human vessels under Galactic Community Protocol. "How far?" Dara asked. 3 minutes at current speed. "Relay station." 6 hours. Dara looked at the signal. It pulsed on the screen in slow, broken rhythms. Priya had been running it through the translation buffer, and fragments of meaning were starting to come through. Not words exactly, more like shapes of meaning, urgency, pain, and something underneath both of those that the buffer labeled simply as warning. "I got a partial on the language," Priya said. "It's Ethari." That name landed in the room quietly. They had all read about the Ethari in the Galactic Community files, a species so old that their records predated most of the other civilizations currently sitting on community councils. Avian in structure, bioluminescent, deeply private, not known for sending distress calls, not known for needing to. "There's one more thing," Priya said. She pulled up the translated fragment on the main screen. It read, "They are still following the sound. Do not make sound. Do not answer this signal. We are dying." Nobody spoke for a moment. Gus finished his nutrient bar and folded the wrapper neatly. "So they're telling us not to answer." "Yes," Priya said. "But they sent the signal." "Yes." "So they want help, but they're scared that answering will make things worse." He stood up and put the wrapper in the recycler. "That's a problem for whoever responds, not for them. They did their part." Rolf said nothing. He was already thinking about something else. Dara could tell by the way his eyes had gone slightly distant. He was running through the medical kit in his head. She knew that look. Dara looked at the signal on the screen. 3 minutes away. A species that had been traveling the stars since before humanity knew fire, sending a broken cry into the dark and telling everyone not to answer it because something was hunting them by sound. She thought about the maintenance shaft, about the coupling that had taken 4 hours, about the way the Quarry Dawn groaned at night like something breathing. "We answer," she said. Priya nodded and opened the channel. Gus went below to check the engines without being asked. Rolf disappeared toward the supply locker. Dara sat down in the pilot's seat and turned the quarry Dawn toward the signal. 3 minutes later, the ship came into view on the forward screen. It was enormous. It had been beautiful once. Dara could see that clearly even now. The Ithari vessel was built in long, sweeping curves, like something grown rather than constructed, with hundreds of ports and panels that should have been glowing. Almost all of them were dark. The structure had cracks running along two of its main sections, and a slow mist of venting atmosphere caught the distant starlight like breath in cold air. It looked like a cathedral that had fallen from the sky. Dara brought the quarry Dawn into approach position slowly, reading the hull damage, calculating a docking angle. The sensors were running full sweeps. Then the sweep pinged. Not the Ithari ship, something else. Something that had been circling the Ithari vessel in a wide, patient arc. Something that had just changed its arc. Toward them. Dara's hand hovered over the intercom. She kept her voice flat. "Everyone strap in," she said. "We have company." The docking clamp connected with a sound like a gunshot, and every human on the quarry Dawn flinched except Gus, who was already moving toward the airlock with his toolbox under one arm. The things circling them outside had pulled back when the ships joined, whether from confusion or caution, nobody knew. Dara was not going to wait to find out. The airlock between the two ships opened into darkness. Not just the darkness of a powered-down corridor, something thicker. The Ithari ship had killed every light source it had. The air that drifted through was cold and carried a faint smell that none of them had words for, like rain before it falls, like something just on the edge of sound. Priya swept her scanner through the opening. Atmosphere is breathable, barely. They've been rationing the circulators. "Life signs?" Dara asked. "Dozens, all clustered deep in the ship. Interior chambers as far from the hull as possible." She paused. "They're very still." Rolf had a pack on each shoulder. One was medical. One was food and water and emergency lighting that he had specifically chosen for low output, dim enough not to throw shapes through hull panels. He had thought about that before being asked. Dara noticed. They moved in. The corridor was tall, built for creatures larger than humans, with arching ceilings that curved away into the dark above them. Dara's small headlamp threw enough light to see the floor and a few feet ahead. The walls were covered in a texture like layered scales, and when her light caught them at an angle, they shimmered faintly in colors that had no business being there: deep blues, soft golds, patterns that moved as the light moved. Gus touched the wall once with 2 fingers and then kept walking. "Living material," he said quietly. "The walls are partly biological." Nobody responded to that. They filed deeper. The first Ithari they saw was a shadow, then 2, then a dozen, standing or crouching in an interior chamber that opened off the main corridor like a held breath. They were tall and angular, with folded structures along their backs that might have been wings once and were now held tight to their bodies. Their faces were long and still. Their eyes caught no light. But their skin did. Faint patterns moved across them, slow pulses of dim color that traveled from chest to throat and back, blues and deep purples and occasionally a flash of something that might have been red. The patterns moved faster when Dara's team entered. Not toward them, just faster. They were afraid. One figure stepped forward from the others. Older Dara could not have explained how she knew, only that she did. The way it moved. The way the others shifted slightly to make space without being asked. Its bioluminescence was different from the rest, slower, more deliberate, like a voice choosing its words. "That's the Elder," Priya said, barely audible. "Sova, the name was in the signal registry." Priya raised her scanner slowly and began running the translation buffer against the light patterns. It was not fast. The Ithari language was not built for ears, and the buffer had only partial records. But Sova seemed to understand what the device was for, because she slowed her patterns and repeated certain sequences, watching the scanner as she did. Meanwhile, Rolf had moved to the edge of the group. A small Ethari was separated slightly from the others, sitting against the wall with one limb held at a wrong angle. He crouched down slowly, made himself smaller, and opened the medical kit without any sudden movement. The Ethari around that one tensed. Sova looked over. Rolf did not look up. He just continued laying out what he needed in slow, deliberate order. He pressed 2 fingers gently to the side of the injured limb, checking blood flow, feeling for the break, and the young Ethari made a sound so quiet it was almost nothing. Not pain, something else. Surprise, maybe. Sova watched for a long moment. She did not stop him. Priya had a partial translation. She turned to Dara and spoke in a low voice. The attackers are called Volkai, swarm predators. They track vibration and sound, the signal drew them, and then once they got close, any noise kept them here. The Ethari have been completely silent for 11 hours. Dara absorbed that. How many did they lose? Priya asked. The light patterns moved, more than 100 before they went dark. Gus had drifted toward the far end of the chamber where a sealed door led deeper into the ship. He was looking at it the way he looked at broken things, not with alarm, but with the patient curiosity of someone already forming a plan. "Engine room is that way," he said softly. "You can tell?" Rolf asked, not looking up from his work. "The vibration pattern through the floor, or the lack of one." He set his toolbox down. "Their core is cracked, but it's not dead. Give me time." Dara looked at Sova. The elder was still watching her, not Priya, not the scanner, her. The light patterns on Sova's skin were slow and even and careful. Priya said, "She wants to know if you are afraid." Dara thought about what was circling the hull outside. She thought about the 100 dead in this ship. She thought about what she did not yet know about the Volkai, which was almost everything. "Tell her yes," Dara said. Priya translated. Sova's patterns shifted, something quick and complex and unreadable. "What did she say?" Dara asked. Priya looked at her screen. She said, "Good, then we are the same." Then the hull rang, one solid impact, low and resonant like a bell struck from outside. The Ethari went completely still. Every light on every one of them died at once. The humans stood in total darkness. Dara did not move. She breathed, she thought. Then she started planning. The Volkai did not come through the wall. They pressed against it. Dara could feel it through her boots, a low, continuous vibration in the hull, like many things moving across the outside surface at once. Testing. Feeling. The Ethari ship was so quiet that even that faint pressure transmitted through the floor and into the bones of anyone standing still enough to notice. She was standing very still. In the dark beside her, Priya had killed the scanner's sound output and was reading everything off a dim screen held close to her face. Rolf had gone motionless mid-wrap on Tal's injured limb. The young Ethari had not made a sound. She seemed to understand silence better than breathing. Gus, somewhere in the dark near the sealed door, set his toolbox down with such exquisite care that it made no sound at all. 2 minutes, 3. The vibration shifted, moving away along the hull, slow and searching, then fainter, then gone. Nobody moved for another full minute after that. Then Dara clicked her headlamp on low and gathered the team near her. Priya had been building something useful while they stood in the dark, a rough map of the Volkai behavior based on the patterns in the translation buffer. She laid it out in a whisper. The Volkai were not a hive in the way humans usually imagined one. They did not share a mind. What they shared was a stimulus response. Sound triggered movement, movement triggered feeding behavior triggered the rest of the swarm. If you made noise, they came. If you kept making noise, they stayed and called others. If you went silent, they kept searching for a while, then moved on to look elsewhere. The Ethari had survived 11 hours by becoming, in every measurable way, dead. The problem was that the Quarry Dawn's crew existed. They breathed. Their hearts beat. Their boots contacted the floor. They had voices and habits and the deep human need to occasionally drop things. Every natural action they took was a signal. "So we have to become quieter than we have ever been," Dara said. "For how long?" Rolf asked. Priya looked at her screen. "The Volcae swarm is large. 16 confirmed signatures on long-range scan, possibly more. They will not leave unless something pulls them somewhere else." She paused. "Or unless we move this ship out of their range." "Engine room," Gus said. "Can you fix it?" He made a face that was not quite a yes and not quite a no. "I can make it move. I cannot promise it moves well, but if the goal is distance, not direction, I can work with that." Dara looked at Sova, who had been watching the exchange with the careful attention of someone following words in a language they do not speak but almost understand. Priya translated the summary. The light patterns on Sova's skin moved in long, slow waves, the pattern Priya had begun to associate with thinking. Then Sova responded. Priya translated. "She says their chief engineer is alive. 2 others also. They have been working on the core in the dark by feel for 6 hours. She says." Priya stopped and looked at her screen again. "She says they have been embarrassed to ask their guests for help because the Ithari built this ship and should be able to repair it." Gus picked up his toolbox. "Tell her I've fixed things I didn't build for 30 years. It's fine." Priya translated. Sova's light patterns did something fast and small that Priya had not seen before. She cataloged it and moved on. Gus went with the 2 Ithari engineers. They communicated entirely through pointing and demonstration, and within the first 10 minutes had established a working dynamic that involved Gus doing something, one of the engineers doing the same thing back to show they understood, and the other engineer watching both of them with an expression that Dara, passing through once, privately identified as professional skepticism toward both parties equally. Rolf finished wrapping Tal's limb. She sat very still through the whole process, watching his hands. When he was done, she held the wrapped limb up and examined it, then looked at him. Her lights ran a soft, slow pattern. Priya happened to be nearby. "That color means something like understood, or received, like an acknowledgement that goes deeper than a nod." Rolf nodded back. Tal watched the nod and after a moment copied it, a slow, deliberate tilt of her long head. Rolf smiled. She watched the smile with great interest. Dara walked the ship. She mapped it. She counted entry points and hull weak spots and rooms that could be sealed fast. She was not a soldier and she was not pretending to be one. She was a search and rescue specialist, and what she was actually doing was building an evacuation plan for 1,200 people through a dark ship while something hunted by sound outside. She was on her 3rd pass when the hull rang again, louder this time, closer to the interior, and this time there was a secondary sound, a thin, high scraping that moved along the outer wall in a slow, deliberate line. Priya's voice came through the earpiece, very quiet. "One of them is inside the outer hull cavity, between the outer and inner layers." It followed a vibration from the docking clamp. Dara stopped walking. She looked at the wall beside her, the beautiful scaled wall with its faint shimmer, and thought about what was on the other side of it. Then she thought about what she had in her pockets: a wrench, a light, a length of emergency tether cord, 3 magnetic anchor clips. She thought about the geometry of the hull. "Priya," she said, barely a breath, "where exactly is the nearest exterior vent panel?" There was a pause. 12 meters behind you. Why?" Dara turned around and walked toward it. Dara had sealed 3 of the 4 vent panel bolts before the thing in the hull cavity figured out she was there. She heard it stop moving. Then she heard it turn, a sound like wet rope dragged across metal, and orient toward the panel she was standing at. She tightened the 4th bolt. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not, but she kept it quiet, slow, disciplined. She had trained herself for this years ago in the dark cold of collapsed mine shafts and flooded ship sections. Fear was allowed. Noise was not. The Volkai scout hit the inner wall of the cavity hard enough to shake the panel in her hands. She did not step back. She pressed both palms flat against the panel and held it while it rattled, then reached into her pocket and pulled out two magnetic anchor clips. She ran them along the panel seam like a secondary lock, not elegant, extremely functional. The scout hit the wall again and again, then it stopped. Priya was in her ear. It's retreating, moving back toward the outer hull. A pause. I think you scared it. Good, Dara said, and finally stepped back. Her legs were shaking slightly below the knee. She let them. Nobody was watching. She got back to the main chamber to find something she had not expected. Sova was standing beside Priya, not watching the scanner for once, but watching Rolf teach Tal how to play a hand game. It was a simple thing, a pattern of taps on the back of the hand, alternating between them. But Tal had been trying to copy it for several minutes and kept getting the rhythm wrong, and Rolf kept doing it again with the patience of someone who had nothing more urgent to do than this. Tal got it right. Her lights burst into a warm yellow that spread across her whole upper body before she seemed to catch herself and dim them quickly. Rolf grinned. Tal looked at the grin and produced a sound, low and harmonic, held for just a second, that Priya translated without being asked. Laughter, Priya said simply. Sova's patterns ran something slow and complicated. Priya looked at her screen for a long moment. She says, Priya began carefully, that in 10,000 years of contact with other species, she has never seen one of them play with one of her people. She says they have met civilizations that were more powerful, more ancient, more wise. But she is watching a creature from a world that should have killed it long ago sit on the floor of her broken ship and choose to make a child laugh. Nobody said anything. Priya cleared her throat. She says she does not have a word for what that is. She says she will need to make one. Gus came back from the engine room at that point, which was fortunate, because it moved everyone on. He set his toolbox down and reported. The core crack was stabilized with a compound that the Ithari engineers had, a biological resin that hardened under pressure and conducted heat without transferring it, which Gus called one of the best materials he had ever worked with and immediately asked if he could have some to take home. The Ithari engineers had apparently found this request so strange that they gave him twice what he asked for without discussion. Minimum propulsion was possible, not fast, not far, but possible. The second piece was harder. Moving the ship would create vibration. Vibration would pull every Volkai in range toward them. They would be louder as a moving target than as a silent one, which meant the moment they started the engines, the swarm would orient and follow. They needed a direction change, not for the ship, for the swarm. Priya had been working on this. The Ithari communications array was damaged but partially functional. If they could route a strong burst signal through it, a controlled output of sound and vibration on a specific frequency, they could send it in a direction away from the relay station. The Volkai would follow the noise. The ships would move toward the station. They had, at best, 40 minutes before the swarm realized the decoy was empty. What does the array need? Dara asked. Manual recalibration of the secondary emitter, Priya said. The targeting algorithm was knocked offline when the hull took damage. Someone has to go outside and physically adjust the emitter housing and reconnect the alignment cable. EVA, Dara said. Yes. In suits. Yes. While the Volkai are circling. Priya said nothing, because the answer was obvious and saying it out loud would not help anyone. Dara pulled out the emergency suit locker inventory she had memorized during her walkthrough. 2 full suits on the Quarry Dawn, accessible from the docking junction. She started calculating the time. Sova had been watching. She spoke to Priya. Priya translated slowly. She says she is the elder of these people. She says it is not acceptable for a stranger to go alone into the dark outside her ship on behalf of her people while she sits inside. Priya paused. She says she will come with you. Dara looked at Sova. Sova looked back. Her light patterns were steady, not the fast flicker of fear or the slow pulse of calculation, just steady, like a decision already made. "The suits won't fit her frame," Dara said. Priya asked. Sova gestured toward the rear of the ship and spoke. "She says they have their own suits." Dara considered it for a count of 3. Then she reached out and handed Sova the second tether line from her own belt. "Then let's go," she said. There was no sound outside. That was the first thing Dara registered when she cleared the airlock, and the hull of the Ithari ship opened above her into open space. No sound, because there was no air. Just the stars, the dark, the slow drift of vented gas crystals catching distant light, and the massive curved surface of the ship stretching away in every direction like a frozen ocean. Sova came through the airlock behind her. Her suit was not like Dara's. It was thinner, translucent in places, with structures built to accommodate her wing limbs folded tight against her back. She moved differently in it, with a kind of careful precision that suggested she had trained for this but not recently. They clipped their tethers to the hull anchor point and began moving. No words. Priya had given them coordinates before they went out. The secondary emitter housing was 80 meters along the upper hull, near a section where 2 long cracks in the exterior plating had buckled the alignment bracket. They would see it when they reached it, a raised dome about the size of a cargo crate with a cable housing running along the hull beside it. Dara moved in the way she had learned years ago, low, slow, 3 points of contact at all times, magnetic boot grips on every step. She did not look at the space around her because there was nothing useful to see out there right now. She looked at the hull, 1 meter, 2, 5. Sova moved beside her. Differently, her people's EVA technique involved longer steps, a kind of controlled glide using the magnetics in the suit's palms and feet in alternation. It was quieter than Dara's method, almost graceful. At 30 meters, Dara's scanner showed a Voakai signature below and behind them, circling. Far enough away that its sensors had not found them yet, they were moving slowly, making no sound the hull could transmit. Slow was invisible. Slow was survival. At 40 meters, Sova stopped. Dara turned. Sova was facing outward, away from the hull, looking into space. Her gloved hand was resting on the hull's surface but loosely, not gripping, just touching. Her suit's translucent sections caught the starlight. Dara watched her for a moment. Then she understood. This was the first time Sova had been outside a ship and seen it. All of it. The full dark with no walls and no ceiling. 10,000 years of her people traveling it, and she had never stood on the outside of a vessel and looked at it with nothing between her and it. Dara gave her 15 seconds, then she touched Sova's arm once gently. Sova turned. Her suit's face panel was partially visible and her bioluminescence was running, white, soft, slow. Dara had no translation for that color. She did not need one. They kept moving. The emitter housing was where Priya said it would be. The bracket had buckled left and the alignment cable had pulled free of its housing connector, a clean separation, not a break. Dara got to work. She pulled the bracket back with both hands, applying force steadily while Sova held the cable in position. It required more pressure than expected. The metal had partially fused in the buckle, and for a moment it did not move. Then it did. One sharp, controlled shift back into alignment. Dara held it. Sova connected the cable. The emitter housing indicator, a small bead of material that Dara realized was biological, like the walls inside, pulsed once, dimly. Then again, then steady. Priya's voice came through the suit comm in the faintest whisper they could manage. "I have a signal from the emitter. Alignment is good. I can fire when you're back inside." Dara and Sova began the return. 50 meters, 40. The scanner showed 2 Voakai signatures now, both circling wider. One had changed its arc slightly, not toward them, but the change was a reminder of how little margin they had. 20 meters, 10. Dara reached the airlock first and held it open. Sova came through and Dara sealed it behind them. They stood in the airlock as it pressurized, both of them pulling in air that tasted recycled and stale and wonderful. When the inner door opened, Priya was waiting with 2 water pouches and the expression of someone who had spent 40 minutes performing the specific misery of watching people she could not help. Sova pulled off her helmet. She stood for a moment, then reached out and put one hand against Dara's face, palm flat, very light, the contact lasting only a second. Then she said something. Priya looked at her screen. She looked at it for a long moment. She used a word, Priya said quietly. The one they use for family, not like someone you're related to, more like someone the universe put beside you on purpose. The ships began to move 10 minutes later. The false signal fired, strong and sharp, throwing noise in the opposite direction of the relay station. On the scanner, the Volkai signatures shifted, oriented, moved away. Gus pushed the engines. The ships crept forward slow, ugly, the quarry Dawn straining under the tow weight, every coupling Dara had fixed in the last 3 weeks earning its keep. Rolf was in the Ethari interior keeping the survivors calm. Tal was beside him, her lights running steady and dim, occasionally looking over at him in the way she had started doing, checking, the way you check on something you want to make sure is still there. The relay station's beacon appeared on the long-range scanner. Gus said, at normal volume for the first time in hours, 38 minutes. The Volkai came back in 36. 2 minutes. That was what they had. The relay station beacon was close enough to read clearly on the forward scanner, and the Volkai swarm was close enough that the hull had started its low vibration again, that bone-deep tremor that by now everyone on both ships had learned to read like a second heartbeat. Dara did not panic. She grabbed the emergency channel on the Quarry Dawn's board and opened every noise source the ship had. Mining alarm, hull breach klaxon, resonance ping used for deep asteroid scanning. She ran them all in a single rooted burst out of the rear emitters, not a distress signal, not a communication, just noise. Pure, directed, deliberate noise fired behind the ships like a trail of sound in the dark. The swarm responded instantly. The scanner signatures turned, followed the trail. The ships reached the relay station with 40 seconds to spare. The station's automated defense grid came online the moment the Volkai entered its perimeter. High-frequency pulse emitters, designed not to kill but to disorient, to make the stimulus that the Volkai followed into a source of pain instead of promise. The swarm scattered. The signatures broke apart on the scanner, moving away in different directions, and then they were gone. The docking bay sealed behind the 2 ships. The silence that followed was different from the silence inside the Ethari vessel. That silence had been held, careful, forced, a thing maintained by will against instinct. This silence was released. It came out of every person and every body in both ships at once, a collective exhale that had been building for hours. In the Ethari interior, the lights came back on. Not all at once. They started at the center of the group of survivors, a single soft bloom of blue-green from one elder, and then spread outward, person to person, as each one realized it was safe to be visible again. By the time the light reached the outer edges of the chamber, it had changed color, warming through gold and amber into something that filled the room like a slow fire. Rolf stood in the middle of it with both packs still on his shoulders and did not say a word. Tal walked to him. She was moving under her own power, the injured limb still splinted but bearing partial weight. She stopped in front of him and performed the nod he had taught her, slow, deliberate, the same careful copy as the first time. Then she made the low harmonic sound again, held it longer this time. Rolf sat down on the floor. Tal sat beside him. Neither of them required a translator for any of what came next. Gus handed in his engine report to the relay station maintenance officer, a single handwritten page that listed every component of the Quarry Dawn that now needed replacing, which was most of the propulsion section, with notes in the margin that said things like acceptable trade and worth it. He accepted a cup of something hot from the station galley and drank it without asking what it was. The formal proceedings took several hours. There was a debrief, a medical assessment of the Ethari survivors, a structural evaluation of the colony ship, and a great many people from Relay Station administration who needed forms filled out. Dara filled them out. She was good at paperwork, another skill from the rescue years that people always found surprising. Sova met with the galactic community representative assigned to the station. His name was Doru, a species that communicated primarily through color shift in their skin, and he was very old and had seen a great many things and was not easily moved. He took Sova's testimony about the Vaokai attack with careful precision and recorded everything. Then Sova continued speaking. Doru recorded this too, with increasing care. When she was finished, he looked at what he had recorded and then looked at her. He asked, in the formal register used for confirmation of significant declarations, whether she was certain of her words. She said yes. He asked what had prompted it. Sova was quiet for a moment. Her light patterns moved slowly, the way they did when she was choosing something exact. They come from a world that tried to kill them every day, she said. They are short-lived and loud, and they break things without meaning to. By every measure my people use to evaluate a civilization, they are young, unfinished. A pause. They boarded my dying ship without being asked. They sat with our grief without trying to fix it. They carried our wounded. They stood in the open dark beside me and did not let go of the tether. She looked at Doru steadily. I have traveled the stars for longer than their entire history. I have met species with more power, more knowledge, more years. I have never met a species that chose to show up the way they did. The declaration that went out across every relay channel in the galactic community that evening was the first of its kind in recorded history. The Ethari had formally named 4 humans as being under sacred protection. The words closest to it in the common translation were something between debt and family and chosen. It caused significant discussion in 17 separate galactic councils and was the subject of confused commentary across many communication networks for weeks. Dara read none of it. She was back in the maintenance shaft of the Quarry Dawn, which had been docked for repairs she could not afford to wait on. The shaft was familiar. The coolant lines were new ones. The relay station had stocked the parts. She had her wrench and half a protein bar and the comfortable groan of the ship around her. Priya's voice came over the comm. You've seen what's being broadcast everywhere, yes? I'm busy, Dara said. A pause, then Sova asked me to tell you something. Dara stopped working. She says the white light, when we were outside, you gave her 15 seconds. Another pause. She says her people have a word for that too. She says it means the moment you understood without being told. Dara sat in the maintenance shaft for a little while without doing anything. Then she picked up her wrench. Tell Gus to pick a place, she said. We're buying dinner.